So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad that you've decided to come to this biostatistics and epi workshop. Our first speaker this afternoon is Ajahn Sira Sriswasdi. Is that right? Yeah. And Ajahn Sira works at the same university as I do, and he is a computational biologist, and he heads the computational biology group at Chula. He originally studied pure maths at MIT, and we're very lucky to have him at Chula, and he's very busy doing lots of projects with AI. And I had a chance to work with him on a couple of projects, and I was very impressed at the way he's able to explain complicated concepts in a way that other people can understand. So we're very lucky to have him this afternoon, and he's going to give us a talk about AI 101 for clinicians. So please join me in welcoming Ajahn Sira.
So thank you very much, Ajahn Steve, for the introduction. So I'm not a clinician, but I have been at Chulalongkorn University Faculty of Medicine for 7 years. So hopefully I understand what clinicians want to know about AI. So some fact, I studied the mathematics behind AI before AI become a thing. So when I study artificial neural networks, we solve that in the papers, with pencil and paper, because we don't have a computer powerful enough to compute the data yet. But nowadays, like only 15 years since then, and we have everything even on our phone. So hopefully today I can give you like a very quick, very broad kind of introduction to AI, and hopefully some tips for you if you run into AI in the future. So let me try. Okay, good. So first, let's start with the most important question, like what is AI? So I used to joke with my students that, so AI is artificial intelligence. So if you want to know if something is AI, like you ask yourself two questions. Is it artificial and is it intelligent? If both of them check, then that's AI. But yeah, but now that we have something that's closer to being very intelligent, artificial, either programs or robots, now actually people start to ask this question more seriously. Like, what's the difference between natural intelligence, hopefully the thing that we have, and artificial intelligence, the things that computer have? What's the difference? So to give you a very quick, very brief summary, so I think AI is a result of computer algorithms because everything runs on computer, and it's mimicking the natural process that we use for learning, for thinking. So it's a mimic of natural intelligence, and it's created by us. So when we want to compare natural intelligence and artificial intelligence, we can use some tools that we have that we use on our students, like on our children. Like, can they memorize something? Like, we know that computer can memorize a lot more than us. Like we ask if our children or our students can recognize some pattern, like the IQ test, or when they play games, like they have to find patterns all the time. And they have to understand whether that patterns will generalize to a new situation or not. That's intelligence. Like they have to be able to try something and fail, and then be able to learn that what's the correct way of solving. They have to be able to create. And then the most important that we want from our graduate students is the ability to reason, like, with cause and effect. So have computers demonstrated the same level of intelligence that we saw in human? Right? We can ask about how computer remembers and how computer can answer things like a trivia games. So computer can beat human. They will beat human in this kind of games because they can remember things without forgetting, unless you break the computer. And now we have software, we have programs that can recognize patterns that sometimes we even doctor cannot describe. Like they may know the lesion patterns when they see it, but if you ask them to describe like what pixel composition or what type of patterns that they saw in the image, sometimes it's very difficult for human to describe. But we can train computer to look at these very tiny details and be able to detect them in kind of any setting. And we know that computers now have the ability to learn from trial and error. Like computer that can play games, computer that beat human at the Go. These are computers that learn to play. Like we are not teaching them with all the possible combination of the board because there are too many possibilities. But we teach computers how to try placing the piece at certain location and see if that makes sense or not. And nowadays we have what's called generative AI. So AI that can create. Now they're not just waiting for data from us. We can ask them to create new art. We can ask them to create new writing from random numbers. So I think computers now have something that's very close to human intelligence. So the next, I want to take you a step back into the underneath the intelligence that we saw from the computers. What's happened underneath? This is the engine behind AI that we see now today, and it's called machine learning. So learning as in human learning, but this is the learning techniques that computers use, or the way that we teach computers. So I have to say that when we talk about AI, it doesn't have to be machine learning. It doesn't have to have like very complex algorithm. Search engine that we use, I mean nowadays there are AI in search engine, but if you kind of go back like 10 years, 5 years, when we do search engine, it's just finding patterns. Like we enter some words, and then Google, Bing, Yahoo will find those words whether they appear in some website, and then they will bring out the result to us. And we think that they did a pretty good job. Like when we search for something, if we put the right keyword, then we get a very good website. And that's intelligence. If some of you do photo editing, like software that can detect certain areas using just the intensity and the colors of the image, these are artificial, like they are computer programs, and they are good, they are intelligent. So AI doesn't have to be machine learning. It can come from algorithms, like search algorithm or image editing algorithms. These can consider AI. But when we talk about AI nowadays, we mostly think about something like this. Like we have a very complex raw data, like chest X-ray image. And we think about AI as something like some black box that can tell us that, oh, this patient has COVID-19 or not. And we use AI for this because sometimes this black box can be very complex. Like it can be so complex that you cannot create a mathematical equation, or you cannot create a statistical model to account for that. You have to have some algorithms that learn on its own. You just show them a lot of chest X-ray image from patient with COVID-19 and from normal patient. And eventually, this black box with the machine learning algorithms eventually learns how to map one data to the other. So in machine learning, there are two primary domains. Like if you start to go into the field, the first one that is mostly familiar to us is supervised learning. So you show the computer that this is apple. If the computer answers banana, then they give a feedback of no, that's wrong. If it answers correctly, then we say yes. So the computer gets the supervision from us. We tell the computer that this is a correct prediction, this is an incorrect prediction. But the other half, that is actually what I'm more familiar about, that I teach at Chulalongkorn, is called unsupervised learning. So I just want to introduce this as well. For example, we might have a lot of images about fruits or about patient or chest X-ray, but we don't give computer the labels. Like we don't tell them that this is an apple, this is a banana, but we ask the computer to see, like, there are many objects on this paper. Can you recognize which one belongs to the same group? Eventually, we want a program or an algorithm that can recognize that all the 3 apples belong to the same group and all the 3 bananas belong to another group, without us telling them that this is a banana, this is a banana, this is a banana. So we call this unsupervised because we just give the computer all the image, all the data. And we ask the computer to find similarities among the data in order to come up with the explanation for what's going on inside. For example, if you have two groups of patients, and I mean here everything is color, so we know that some patients are from the blue groups and some are from the orange group. But even without that information, let's say we measure the blood sample from normal and from the infected patient, like there will be some proteins or some genes that are differently expressed in those blood samples. So when we make the measurement and when we visualize on the computer screen, sometimes we can see right away that, oh, the blood result from my cohort somehow form 4 separate types. These have the same blood result, these have the same blood results, but these have different test results. So that's this visualization is technically called dimensionality reduction, because you might measure 10 proteins, 50 proteins in the blood, but when you want to visualize this information on your computer, you only have 2 dimensions, X and Y. So somehow you have to have some intelligent algorithms that can reduce many measurements into just 2 coordinates. And in such a way that you can still learn something from the data. That's not totally random. And next, you can start to see that, I have maybe 4 subtypes of the infection. Like, these are mostly normal, and these are mostly infected. So the ability to group the patients together, and we call that they have 4 subtypes. Like, you are familiar with this. This is a process called clustering. Like, so you can identify a group of patients with similar clinical characteristics, with similar chest X-ray image, with similar test result, and then we can say that these form the same cluster or the same subtype. So some of you might have heard about reinforcement learning. So this is the algorithm that we ask the computer to do trial and error learning. Right? Compared to purely supervised learning, like we give the computer the data and then we give the answer, like yes or no. But in reinforcement learning, like when we want the computer to react, like in the environment, for example, to control a robot, like, we cannot map all possibility for the robot's action because it has to be anywhere in the room. It has to be able to react with any object. So instead of mapping out all the possible data, we can ask the computer to try. So the computer in this case is an agent. You can think of it as a pet. Like, we can try to show something to the pet. Like we want the dog to catch the branch. We throw the branch. If the dog goes and fetch it, then that's the action, like the dogs go and fetch it. If it does, then we usually give it treats, like we give it food. So the dogs know that the next time that we throw the branch, it better run and get it, because that will give it the food. But if we throw the branch and the dog sits still, like they don't get the food, like, so they will also learn that by not doing that, then they are missing out on the reward. So in this case, the agent or the computers start to learn that if they move the robot in certain way, that it doesn't collide with the wall, then it can accomplish the task. But if the computer moves the robot in such a way that it ran into you, like, it will be penalized. And the algorithms start to accumulate experience from this kind of action and reward setting until it learns how to do things, without us having to tell them to turn left and turn right at certain moment. So in a supervised learning framework that we are more familiar with, if you want to read the paper, the best way to break it down is first, a supervised learning, the way that we train AI, we have to start with the first step. What do we want the AI to do? We have to pick the task that we want the AI to do. Do we want it to classify chest X-ray image? Do we want it to control the robot? Do we want it to predict the survival of the patient? We have to first decide what the task is, what the AI has to do. Then we have to collect the data. Like if we want to teach the computer to do something, then we need to collect the data, the answers to train the computers. And the rest will be more technical, like how to build the models and how to evaluate the result and how to improve it. Most of the time, every AI development project, you can break it down into these 4 steps. So you might ask, like, you probably learn some, if you are here in this workshop, then you probably have some interest in statistical models and some computational analysis. So you might have already learned some models in your research. Some of you probably have used a linear model. You can predict or you can calculate the risk score for the patient by looking at different factors from the patient and then have different coefficients, and then you sum that together, then you get a model that can split or classify your patient into different kind of subtype or different risk group. Some of you might have tried something like a tree model, where it's like a question and answer. So you might ask the patient first, like what his or her age is. If the age is high, like more than 30, then you probably have a different way to ask the next question than if you are facing with a young patient. So this kind of a tree model, you keep asking the question like about the age, and then you split the patient into 3 groups. Then for the older groups, you might ask, do you smoke? So if the patient smoke, then they might have a high risk of something. If they don't, then they probably have a low risk. So a tree model is also a machine learning model. It's totally different from the linear model, where you calculate everything and sum them together into a risk score. Tree model is more like a question and answer. Another approach that we can use to build machine learning models is very simple. Like sometimes when you see a new patient, you might ask, or your brain might ask, like, oh, I have seen some patient with similar characteristics in the past, and you might recall that that patient has a certain disease. So then you have some prior knowledge that, oh, maybe this new patient who are presented with the same symptoms, with the same clinical characteristics, might have the same disease as well. So we call this something like a nearest neighbors approach, where if you see a new patient like located here, and that patient's profile is very similar to other patients in the past from the blue group, then we probably think that that patient probably belongs to the same group, maybe the same disease or maybe the same phenotype. So these models are very simple. Like we can just say I can just explain them with 1 sentence each, and then you all understand how they work. But the thing is, when we have a very simple model, it's not very powerful. Right? We all know that linear model can fit certain situation, but not the rest of the situation. Like very complex patterns, you cannot fit with the linear model. So in classical machine learning, we try to improve the power of these models, the prediction power of these models, by several ways. I'm going to show a few ways to give you some ideas of the techniques. And these all make sense because these are all invented by humans. So let's say you have a linear model. Like it's very simple, it's not very powerful, it's not accurate. So when you fit the first model and you make the prediction, there will be a lot of errors. Then what you might want to do is, okay, now I know that the model makes certain errors. Can I make another model, like the second model, that focus on these errors and correct them? So you train the first model, it's not very powerful, but you know what its mistakes are. Okay? Then you try to build a second model to focus on these mistakes, these errors. So that now you have 2 models, and these 2 complement each other, because the second models cover where the first model failed. And even 2 models might not be enough, like they might still together make some common errors, so you can train the third models that try to account for the errors made by the prior 2. This is called boosting. So you boost the signal, you boost the performance of the model by creating more and more models that complement the prior ones. Another way is called stacking. So we know that linear models have a certain characteristic, like it combines all the factors into a single risk score. And we know that the 3 models behave like a question and answer. So these 2 models are best suited for different situations. In order to create a model that are adaptable to many situations, you can create 1 linear model, you can create 1 tree model, you can create 1 nearest neighbor models, and then you can train another model that try to pick for a new patient, should I use the linear model, should I use the tree model, or should I use the nearest neighbor models? This is called stacking because now we have multiple models, multiple different families of models, and we want to pick the right one for the right patient or for the right situation. But even these techniques are not enough to, let's say, answer or understand the chain X-ray, because it's too complex for linear models, for tree models, for nearest neighbor models. The limitation of classical machine learning that we face before we have the modern AI, there are two problems. First, when we look at the data, once the data become complex enough, none of the simple technique can fit it very well. No matter what you use, it doesn't really fit the data perfectly. That's the first problem. And the second one is when you have this kind of raw data, like image data or text data, how can you convert these to numbers so that the computer can process? Because everything that the computer does underneath is all about numbers. They are not reading the words. They are not looking at this image like how we look at it. So these are two limitations that prevent machine learning in the past to be as powerful as the AI that we have today. First, it cannot kind of fit very complex pattern. And the second, it cannot process raw data that human understand, but computer cannot understand. So what's the difference then? One of the ability of modern AI is called representation learning. So in this case, representation means how you represent the data with numbers. When you have a certain chain X-ray, how can you represent that chain X-ray image as numbers so that your computer can understand? So we know that naive representation, for example, if we consider every word in a dictionary and we map them to a number, like man to 1, woman to 2, boy to 3, girl to 4, this is a representation because you change one word to a number. But it's not good, right? Because there is no information at all that 1 and 3 are of the same gender. 1 and 3 are just two different numbers. So this is a representation, but it's not useful. The same, when we look at this image, even if it's very low resolution, I bet that most of you can tell that this is a map. There's a city street, and then there's some water, some river, some lake. But in terms of computers, it's going to see just these black and white and grayscale number. So black being 0, white being 255, and gray somewhere in between. So this is also a representation. You can change an image into these numbers, but this number doesn't mean much to the computer. When you look at this, there's no way that you can tell that this is a map, just from these numbers. So how can we create algorithms or an AI that can understand this complex data, this raw data? So I'm going to go back to your experience in image editing. Hopefully you have Photoshop hours like me. So sometimes you want to blur the image. You want to sharpen or blur the image. There are these functions in Photoshop in your mobile phones. But I'm not sure if most of you are aware that underneath is just numbers multiplying with each other and adding to each other. So for example, when you want to blur the image, the idea of a blur is that when you have a certain pixels, you want to change that pixels to something that is average of the other pixels around it, because you want to make everything more flat, more blurred. So what happened is the middle pixels got multiplied by 1/4, and the neighbor pixel got multiplied by 1/8 and 1/16, and then summed together. And now you have something that's blurred. That might not seem very intelligent, but what about this one? So we want to identify from a face, we want to identify where the face kind of transition into the hair of the person. When the face kind of transition into the hair, what changed is the color, from lighter color to darker color. My head is not a good example for that, so take that example. And we can detect that because if we multiply the middle pixel by 8, and then we multiply everything else around it by -1. So what happens is, if we pick a pixel in the middle of the hair, then that pixel will be black, like multiplied by 8, and then the neighboring pixel will also be black, be dark, and they are all multiplied by -1. So we have 1 pixel times 8, and 8 pixels times -1, so they cancel out. So when we examine the area in the middle of the hair, like, these are all dark because all the colors cancel out. The same on the face, because they are all light color, so all the signal cancel out. But when we look at the pixels at the transition between the face and the hair, like, the part below will be lighter, the part on top will be darker. So now we have an imbalance between the -1 and this 8. And then we have this signal. Like, so we can detect age by just multiplying and adding numbers. So these are useful for Photoshop application, but I'm going to skip this. So, but who can say that it's going to be useful for shade X-ray? How do we know that what numbers we should multiply into the lung image so that we can get something that can reflect COVID-19 infection? And the answer is we don't. So finding the right numbers to multiply is too difficult for human. We can do it for Photoshop's application. We cannot do it for shade X-ray. So the idea is we want to let the computer do it. For example, let's say the computer pick a certain numbers to multiply, so we get some signal. And then we want to try using that signal to classify whether the patient is infected or not. If it's a good signal, like if the computer finds the right numbers, then it will have a good prediction. But if it finds poor numbers, it will lead to poor prediction. And the computer can get that feedback. If it pick the right number, then the prediction will be good, and that numbers will be kept. If it pick the wrong number, the prediction will be poor, and the computer will change the number to something else. So it will essentially explore the numbers. Like instead of -1 and 8, it will try like 1.4, 2.5, -3, and see which one works for this task, which is classifying between COVID-19 infection and normal. And this is a process that we actually did in the computer in order to make the AI that can understand shade X-ray. It tried to find the right numbers to multiply to the image to extract that signal. And this is something that, so once we have the model that works, like we go back and we ask, how did it work? Because we know that for Photoshop application, it's very simple. But to classify that this is a car, it's not just about getting some numbers right. The computer has to be able to understand what a car means. Right? It has to have some wheels, it has to have a door, it has to have the front light. Right? Did the computer really understand that? Right? So we can dig deep into the AI models. Like we can ask, this is something that we can ask from the AI model. We can ask, what did it see at first, and what did it see later on inside the model? Right? And what people saw is that at first, the computer just sees very simple patterns, like lines and color gradients. But eventually, the AI are able to put together these patterns into geometric objects and then into real-world objects that even human can look and recognize that some of these are the wheels, some of these are probably front light, for example. So this happens inside the computer program. Once we give it enough pictures of a car, it learns that in order to correctly classify it as a car, it has to be able to combine these signals similar to how our eyes work until it eventually recognizes very complex objects. And the next part, I think I'm running behind schedule, but I'm going to try to speed it up. So you might be surprised that the AI that we have nowadays, the theoretical framework for it has been established since 80 years ago. The idea that how artificial neural networks will work and how to update the model with data has been around for 80 years. We just didn't have the computer to do it, and we didn't have the data to do it. Okay. So this is a model. It's like you are connecting multiple neurons together. So in our body, the neuron can send signal from dendrite to the axon direction. So in the computers, we also mimic that by taking signals from the image or from the text, and then multiply the numbers, and then send out the signal. So this is similar to how we see the -1 and the 8 can multiply with the image, and then send out the signal, whether it's a dark area or the light area. And putting this calculation together create a more complex structure. But you might be wondering if it's enough, like, to just connect these calculation. Like, if you put 1,000 calculators together, you get an AI. Right? And I don't think I have this slide here, but if you're interested, there's a theory called universal approximation theorem, and it says that this kind of a structure where you take a linear input, like you multiply the input by the coefficients, sum them together, and then you pass this whole input, which is usually your linear regression, you pass it to another function. And this is called activation. So similar to how neurons activate. If there is no signal, then the neurons stay silent. If there are signals, then the neuron activates. Just these two components, like linear input with the activation function, this structure can approximate any possible mathematical functions. So with this simple kind of structure, mathematician has proved, like many decades before, that this thing can approximate anything if we have the computer to do it, if we have the computing power to do it. So this happens around 2012 and 2015, where people start to have faster computer. That's the first factor. And also we have the internet. So now people start to be able to pull the data together. And the first project that showcased modern AI is called ImageNet. I'm not sure if some of you are familiar with this. So ImageNet is a competition among computer science people where they want to compete so that to see who can come up with a computer program that can look at these kind of natural image, like the photo that we take every day, and classify what objects are present inside the image. If there is a dog inside, if there is a pizza inside, if there is a person inside. In the beginning, the computer is not very good. So this is the error rate. So the computer makes the error about a quarter of the time. For the reference, human makes about 5% errors. But during this period, from 2012 to 2015, we start to have more data from the internet. We start to have faster computer, and we are able to create a larger neural network models. So 8 layers mean we have this kind of 8 times. 20 means we have that layers 20 times. And then 150 means we have 150 layers. And we can see that once we have large enough computer to accommodate large enough models, then the computer can actually learn what objects are inside this image. And these are even better than if you ask a person to do it. Okay. So that's the start. Like, we start to have computers that are showing the intelligence level on par with human. But for computer science people, that's not enough. We have to go deeper. So we start to have models that have 8 layers, 20 layers, 150 layers. That's not enough. Like, if we want to have the model to be able to understand medical image, which is more complex than regular photos, we need to go even deeper. Like, so the model that we have nowadays, if you look at the y-axis, this is a number of parameters. So if you're familiar with doing statistical models, like, we are worried about the number of parameters all the time, that if we have more parameters, then we have to have more data so that we can estimate the parameters correctly and confidently. But for this neural network model, like, you're starting to have 1 billion parameters. No way that you have 1 billion data point. So deep learning is now a new separate field from machine learning. And deep learning is now the engineering way, the art of training the model that have more parameters than the sample. How can we still make it work? Like, this is the reason why we call it deep learning is because the old technique no longer works. You have too many parameters. You will not be able to fit it. But with deep learning techniques that engineering people develop nowadays, we are able to train this kind of very large, very expensive model. Okay, let me try to go toward the end. So let me skip this. Then, okay, this is more useful for you, I think. So the question that you as a clinician might ask yourself, like, if I'm presented with an AI from a company, how do I work with it? How do I make sure that it understands clinical data? How do I make sure that it doesn't make mistake? So what I'm going to say is that it will make mistake. Because AI is just a mathematical approximation of intelligence, of knowledge. So this example, the AI made the correct diagnosis. It can tell that this person has cardiomegaly. It can say that this person has atelectasis. But when we ask the model, like, where in the image that you look to say that this is a cardiomegaly case, and where did you look that say this is a atelectasis case, the model looks outside of the lung. Like, this is really weird. And later, people start to realize that some hospitals have a text printout at the corners that say the patient information and the diagnosis. So these models learn that to look for that information, it has to look at the edge of the image, not in the middle. So this is very important. And this is something that the AI can be correct, but it can be wrong at the same time. It's correct in the diagnosis, in the answer, but it's wrong in the reasoning, like where the evidence came from. And this is because when we train model, we ask it to do a narrow task, like to classify the disease. We didn't really ask it to point out or to give reason. That's something that people are working on nowadays, to ask the model not just to give prediction, but to give the reason. And the reason has to be correct in order for the whole thing to be correct. Okay. Boop. Okay. So how can you use AI so that it's safe and it's not counterproductive? So one of the experience that we have at Sira is AI works very well as a second opinion. So we don't show the answer at first, like we let the radiologist look at the raw X-ray. And once they made the decision, then they take a look at the heat map that we give. And if it's the same as where they saw the lesion, it gives them confidence that they are making the right diagnosis. And if it's not, then sometimes they tell me that they start to think if they missed something. So it doesn't mean that when the computers disagree with you that one of you is wrong. Both of you can be correct because the lesion can be present at multiple locations. So when you disagree with the AI, it can make you question more, look at more details in the image. And AI can be used to augment your workflow as well. The even simple AI that create animation can make the interaction and the experience of the user much better than just text and numbers. We can have AI that warn us, because when we look at video image, we can miss something if we move the telescope. If we move the scope very quickly, we can miss the polyps or the lesion. But with AI, it can give us a real-time warning that something is there. In pathology application, if you have to look at the whole slide image, that takes time. But if we have model that can tell you that, the lesion that you want to look at may be at these 3 locations, that saves a lot of time. You don't rely on the AI to make the diagnosis. You still have to make the diagnosis. But the AI saves your time. Instead of looking at the whole slides, you can just look at certain location and see if you find the cells or the lesion that you want to look for. And for people who run the hospital, you can learn about the traffic in the hospital, the number of ambulance, and the number of beds that you have at certain location by using AI to analyze CCTV image, the closed circuit cameras. This can give you better handle of the hospital operation without having to have someone look and count like we used to do. Okay. So the most important things about AI is when you use it, you have to ask for the explanation or for the reasoning. For any models, if you run into a AI developer that tells you that, no, we cannot provide you reason because the model is too complex, they are lying. Because for any models, it's always possible to ask for explanation. For example, if you have a model that predicts the possibility that the patient will be infected or will be sick with a certain disease, there are techniques, general techniques that can apply to any models that can tell you that, let's say from the baseline in the population, there's a 10% chance that the patient will be infected. It can tell you the contribution from different clinical characteristics, like BMI of 40 might increase the risk by 0.1, high BP might increase the risk further by 0.1, being a female might reduce the risk because this disease is more prevalent in male, and having age of 65 might increase the risk a lot because this is more frequent in older people. Like there are these techniques that can give you contribution from each factor that goes into the AI. And for AI that use image, there are also techniques that can tell you where in the image that the AI looked at in order to make that decision. So in this case, we can tell that the model correctly classified that the patient draw the clock incorrect because we asked them to draw at 11:10, but the wrong hand point at number 1, which is 11:05, not 11:10. So just quick take-home message. So some of you might be worried that AI is too good, it will replace you. No, because it's still limited to a certain task. It's still not perfect in the reasoning, so humans still have to be supervising that. Clinicians still have to make the final decision. And my final message is that you are the actual MVP of medical AI life cycle. You are the one who understands the data. You are the one to understand what task or what prediction the AI should make. You are the one that evaluate the model. No one can say that the AI is good or bad except you. And you are the one that actually monitors how the AI is working in the environment. You are the one that produce new data. So you are the one that actually complete the whole thing. So when I work at Sira, I try to bring computer engineers and clinicians kind of together from day one so that the engineer sees how the data are collected and the clinician sees how the models are developed and tested so that all of them can work together to complete this whole cycle. And that's everything I have for today. Yes.
Do we have any questions for Sira?
I will be around until the end, so yeah, so you can ask me anytime.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was just saying that it's not working that well, Steve, but anyway. It was a pleasure to hear. Can I go back to normal? Is that? I wasn't holding it close. It was you. No. I was saying that as a researcher and doing a lot of statistical methodology, I suppose, machine learning is something that we now are talking about, especially when it comes to prediction models, and a lot of classification models is something that for aging people we're really interested in doing. So machine learning has been offered as a way of developing a new CVD risk equation, for example. And I just wanted to say thank you for presenting it in such a way that I now feel like I understand at least some of the terms and what the intentions are. It is really not frightening, but you know, we are looking at a black box when we talk to people like yourself and saying how you might be able to help. I was concerned in the past in terms of using machine learning to determine what might be the most important risk factors, for example. But you've also just suggested now that it's us that drive and make those decisions as opposed to the machine. But anyway, thank you. That was great, and I loved all the images as well.
Thank you. So, okay. Are you ready?
Yeah, no, you please respond and
Okay. Yeah, so I was fortunate that when I first learned about the mathematical principle behind this, they are not ready yet for use. So I think people nowadays, one of the things is we saw the power of machine learning, and it's so magical that we got lured into it. But actually underneath, they are all kind of principles that are based on human intuition. Like all the models are based on our imagination of how we learn, of how we understand. So yeah, underneath it's all very simple. But yeah, when you look at what it can do, it's very magical, it's very mysterious, very black box. Yes, I think we
Thanks for that talk. It was so fascinating, really interesting. So my question for you is, when you work with clinicians and we're trying to develop something to inform something that will be useful in clinical practice, what in your experience are the pitfalls, things that we need to be careful about when we're trying to work with computer scientists to design systems? Thanks.
Okay. So that's a very good question. So when I break down the process of supervised learning, from picking the task, collecting the data, building the model. When you talk to computational people, they tend to think about the building the model part. They think that the data are all clean and ready from you, and then they will just build the model with the best thing they have and get the best result for you. But actually, the most important part are the first two steps. For example, in the pathology application, if you pick the natural task, you might want to ask the model to identify every cancer cell. But if you want the model to be able to identify every cancer cell in the tissue image, then some human, has to label all those cancer cells. And this can mean 10,000 cells, 100,000 cells. And eventually we found that it's impossible. No matter how many cells we label, we spend 6 months getting the pathologist to spend hours and days labeling the data, the accuracy doesn't reach the acceptable level. It doesn't even reach 80% accuracy. Because there are so many variety in the background of the tissues, so many variety on the cancer cells themselves, you can never make the perfect model. But when we ask the pathologists, what do you want to use this for? They say that, we just want to count the mitotic figures, the number of cancer cells that are dividing. So then we say, wait, if you want to count the mitotic cells, do you count the whole image? And they said, no, we just find a region that has high density of cancer cells, and then we count that. And that's the result. So now, after knowing that, instead of training the model to identify every cancer cell, now we just ask the model, can you find the highest density of cancer? And that's easier because even if the model makes mistakes, if the mistakes are uniformly made, the highest density region should still be correct. And once we know that, then actually the model that we already had earlier already worked. But we were fooled into just trying to get 90% accuracy on individual prediction that we spend time doing this. When we know that if we ask the clinician carefully about what they want to use it for, then we actually have a much easier way to solve that.